All right, so let's go ahead and get started. As I said, I assume that you've already read through all of this carefully. We're going to go directly to starting the process of our submission. So of course we're clicking on submit. Well, we would click on submit your results here, but first we have to make sure that we go and get the relevant response. As you saw, I want your response to the second prompt in the week 2 assignment. So you go to grades and feedback, and then you look for that week 2, that's a 10% one. Yep, I'm going to click on that. I'm going to copy it. Then we're going to get back to the respective page. Some of you like to do this in Word and then copy and paste it. Just pay attention to the formatting and make sure everything looks good. Okay, now we go back here. Remember, I do not want you to post this as an attachment. Always use write submission unless otherwise directed. For example, when I have you submit evidence of engagement with something. By the way, if you want to work on it like in something separate, but then the formatting gets all wonky in here, what you can do is take the final product that you have, maybe you worked on it in Word, and then use this right here. It will clear the formatting. You'll keep all your brackets, numbers, and labels. What you will lose is when you actually, you should be okay. You'll lose like bolding and stuff like that, but you might want to give that a try. And then just once you have your, you have your final answer in here from Word, it'll just clear things like bolding, italics, and stuff like that. And then you can just use this here to, make sure the formatting's good. All right, so if you'll bear with me, I want to make sure that the way that this argument appears here looks the same in the handout if you happen to have downloaded or copied it. Okay, so I've got this formatted such that the lines here end where the version of the argument I gave you is, which is the same one in Word. All right, so now what we're going to do, of course, is so during week 6, I did a video where I pretended to be a student and I role modeled what it looks like to reflect intellectual virtue when trying to apply everything that you've learned to a given argument. So this time, I'm not going to do it so explicitly because that does add to the time of the video. Instead, I'm going to focus on going through the analysis and coaching you through it, assuming that you know what it means to reflect intellectual virtue while working through this kind of assignment, much less any assignment. All right, so let's go ahead and start with bracketing and numbering. And remember, at any point, you can stop and try it on your own to practice first and to check yourself, self-assess. So we're going to start with bracketing and numbering. Oh, and by the way, at the end, no, that's it. Sorry, I'm getting this confused with the NUPIX class. Okay, so bracketing and numbering. We know that we're supposed to bracket and number all statements. Ooh, a mistake that I saw some people make, even though it should have been written in your master notes or extra tips and warnings, even though I went over this as an example, and one of the many examples I gave you, some people did not bracket and number all the statements, and they made exactly the mistake that I warned them about. That is, just because a statement doesn't function as a premise or a conclusion doesn't mean you shouldn't bracket and number it. I really stressed that and had an example of that. And in your notes, it does say to bracket and number all statements. So be careful with that. So 1, it is not rational for me to take a definitive stance on whether it was morally permissible for government to make me shelter in place. Okay. On the one hand, I want to say it. Oh, look at this. It looks like they meant to say probably what. What 2 letters did they leave off? Was. Okay, so I put this in here to remind you that you can and should and must take care of little typos and stuff like that. So if you have run-on sentences, comma splices I'm not so worried about, but make sure you understand that if you have a comma splice, you have 2 statements in that sentence, at least. Take care of sentence fragments, syntax, what was the other one? Run-on sentences as well. So you need to fix those minor issues. You just can't change the content really, but you can change things like that for your argument to make sense in that regard. Basic writing communication stuff. So on the one hand, I want to say it was. Okay, so I want to say it was. I could bracket, I want to say it was. And since they're saying it's not rational for them to decide, I might want to include, I might want to include I want. Now, if you want to, if I can also just say it was, but I think I'm going to say I want. All right, so there we've got statement 2. Because, okay, so that's statement 3. People stay home help to slow down the spread of the coronavirus. After all, it seems like keeping people safe from dangerous diseases is the right thing to do. So there's another statement. And yet I'm torn. That's another statement. This is a good example of a statement that some people might not want to bracket and number because they know it's not playing a role in the logic of the argument. And so they'll just cross it out, but then they will lose a lot of points. Let's say that this has, 6 statements. Well, each of those statements, the work that you do on each statement is going to be worth 15 points. If you did not bracket and number this, you might lose up to 5 points just because you didn't bracket it and number it. So bracketing and numbering is an easy way to get credit. So make sure you're maximizing that. So then it says, I think the effects. So I'm going to go ahead and put my bracket number here. So 5. I did number 4 twice. So number 5. So here we've got 6. The effects on small businesses has been horrible. It seems wrong to make this sector of society to bear. Whoa. I got lost here. The effects on small businesses has been horrible. It seems wrong. So here's an example of some run-on sentences that might lead someone to not notice that there's 2 statements in here. So there's actually one statement right here. I think the effects on small businesses has been horrible. Then there's another statement that they didn't properly indicate because they didn't use the proper punctuation at the end of horrible. And so right here is we see 7. Okay. It seems wrong to make one sector of society to bear the economic burden of protecting the public health. So that's statement 7. Hence, also thinking that it was not morally permissible. Okay. It seems like they want to issue a separate statement. It seems like, they have hence, like a conclusion. But what's problematic with this? It lacks a subject. All they say is also thinking it was not morally permissible. What is lacking is not the verb, but what? A subject. So they left out the word what? I. So again, we have here and we have here with the missing subject, here again with the missing subject, and then here with the run-on sentences. Where were the run-on sentences? Right here. These are examples of things that if you have them, you should correct them. You must correct them. It's not only okay to correct them, but you should correct them. Okay, so let's go ahead and say that this is statement, where are we at? 8. Okay. All right, so if I have made mistakes, I'm going to capture them as I go through the next step. So my next step is to identify premises and conclusions. On this one, it says, it is not rational for me to take a definitive stance on whether it was morally permissible for government to make me shelter in place. So some of you in your original passage have this italicized, and that's great. But when you do the reformat, one thing that I noticed a mistake that some students made was they left it italicized, and you should not leave any statements. No statement should be italicized. A really strange thing that I saw in 1 or 2 submissions in the reformat is that some people had all kinds of formatting. They had bold, they had underline and italics, and none of that should be there in the reformat. Okay, so moving along. Now, so what is an argument? An argument is a set of statements where at least one, a what? Premise, if it is given in support of at least of another, a what, guys? Conclusion. All right, so now, if you listen to my tips, if you've reviewed my notes, if you wrote important tips down, then you know that if you've done this correctly, then the first statement should be a conclusion. Okay, even if you did take a definite stance, if you followed directions in the week 2 assignment, then you should have a conclusion as your first statement. In this argument, they did not take a definitive stance, but they still have a conclusion, and their conclusion is that it's not rational for them to take a definite stance. So we know that that's going to be it's likely to be a conclusion based on the hints and tips that have been given by Dr. C. Then we have, on the one hand, I want to say it was. So what they're saying here is that they want to conclude that it was permissible. So it seems like they're saying, here's a possible conclusion that one might reach that I am tempted to affirm. And so it seems like they're offering a possible conclusion here. And if that's the case, then we know that so again, if you follow directions, so let's say you did choose this option here, okay? And notice that some things I'm going to be talking about with respect to this argument are particular to this argument. Not everything I say about this argument will apply to your argument. For example, if you have a simple argument, it may not every single thing is going to apply. But if you chose to say this for this argument, more will apply to what you have. But again, if you didn't completely follow instructions on how to set up your response for this part based on based on being able to see two different sides, if you did not follow to a T the original instructions I gave you during week 2, then it is less likely that everything I say applies. But if you followed every single thing that I said during week 2 about choosing this as your conclusion based on two opposing sides, then most of what I say, like 100%, 99% of what I say in terms of labeling will apply. Okay, so that said, there are still a lot of general things that apply no matter what your conclusion is. But I said all that because if this is a conclusion, it's a conclusion for one side that leads them maybe, what I meant to say is that if you're a person who did this or, with this kind of conclusion, then everything you said after this is supposed to be in support of this first statement. That means that if you did this correctly, then statement 2 is also being given in support of statement 1. It just turns out that statement 2 is going to function as a conclusion first, but it is going to be functioning as a premise probably for statement 1. Okay, but of course, if you have a simple argument, if you did this correctly during week 2, then everything you have after statement 1 should be somehow supporting either as a premise or as a statement that functions as a premise and then as a conclusion at some point. So that said, we think that this is a conclusion. I want to say it was morally permissible because typical premise indicator. So they're saying, I want to say it was morally permissible. I want to draw this conclusion. What reason can be given in support of the conclusion on this side of the debate that it was permissible? Well, making people stay at home helped to slow down the spread of the virus. Then we see the premise indicator after all. Some people had the word after all in their argument and they told me it was a conclusion, ignoring what I stressed about that during week 3, 4, or 5, and hence the notes they should have. So after all typically tells me a premise is coming, so they're giving another premise in support of a conclusion. Then they've got, and yet I'm torn. Okay, so I'm torn is just saying that they've got some kind of psychological state. It seems like they're saying they're torn between two views. Maybe they can see the rationality. So at first I was tempted to cross this out and say, oh, it's just kind of contextual psychological information. But if they're saying they're torn, they're saying they can't decide. And if they can't decide, then that helps to support the conclusion that it's not rational. So now that I'm thinking about this, I'm changing my mind to say that this might be functioning as a premise as to why it's not rational. Okay, so then they said, I think the effects on small business has been horrible. And actually, now I'm noticing another grammar, something else I can change. It says the effects, I need to change that, it shouldn't be has, it should say what? Have. So I'm fixing my grammar. I just used incorrect grammar to say I need to correct my grammar. I said fixing to, LOL. All right, so the effects on small businesses have been horrible. Okay, not sure what they're doing with that. It seems wrong to make one sector of society bear the burden of protecting the public health. Hence, I know that hence typically indicates a conclusion indicator. Now, when I was first reading this, I was thinking, maybe this is just repeating what is in statement 1. But now that I have looked more closely at statements 6 and 7, and now that I've reread statement 8, I'm thinking that maybe statement 8 is supposed to flow from, be supported by something that came before it. It says, here's another thing that we can fix, guys, that I should fix and must fix, that it's not only okay to fix, but I should fix. There's a verb missing here, right? I also thinking that it was, what should we have here? What's the little verb? Helping verb. I am. Okay, so there's another example of something to correct. I am also thinking that it was not morally permissible. Oh, yeah. So what they're now doing is we see here is that they're giving the other side of the debate. They've got statement 6, which is bringing in small businesses and the effects of, sheltering in place. And then they're making a moral statement, right, about economic burden upon a certain sector of society. And it seems like they're using 6 and 7 then, because they say hence, right? They're using 6 and 7 in support of 8. So if 6 and 7 are being given in direct support of statement 8, we know that this is a sub-conclusion. And then we go back and we look at statements 3, 4, and 5, and it seems like they're probably, what does it say? On the one hand, I want to say it was because they're giving reasons for, right? And then they're not done giving a reason for statement 2, because they say after all, and you can see that statement 4 has content that looks like they want to join to the premise that is statement 3. So this, it seems like statements 3 and 4 are trying to support statement 2 as sub-conclusion. Now, that said, you might not be able to figure this out all for yourself when you are working on your own argument, but you can always put initial labels. And then as you're reformatting, and I've iterated this time and time again, as you're reformatting, that can be the time where you make final decisions about which statements are functioning as what and where the statements should occur in the reformat. Okay, so now, if these are sub-conclusions, oh my gosh, guys, here's another mistake that I saw some students make. And I warned against this during a lesson and during some demonstration even. So if I see the label sub-conclusion, then what should I see somewhere else in the argument? Should I see a C by itself? Notice this, they've got sub-conclusion, sub-conclusion, and now I've got a conclusion. If I see sub-conclusion in your argument, what should I see? What else should I see? A final conclusion. You cannot have an argument with only sub-conclusions and a conclusion. At least one, there's going to have to be at least one kind of what, there's going to have to be at least one kind of what conclusion. A final. And remember, you got to keep in mind the context, the previous lessons. What did I say? If you've done this correctly, then everything you provide after the first statement is being given in support of which statement? The very first one, including any sub-conclusions that come after it. So 2 and 8 are also being used to support statement 1. In other words, statements 2 through 8 are all offered in support of statement 1. That's what they're all aiming at. We go back to the lesson on complex arguments. We review that and we realize, looking at the lessons and the examples, the warnings and the tips, that this should be labeled FC. Alrighty, so now what do we need to do, everybody? Eliminate excess verbiage. We need to mark it out by drawing a line through it. Oh, and remember, if you don't see all the editing functions, you need to come right here and click on this arrow. Alrighty, so let's start doing that. I forgot to remind you, but of course you know the drill. If you want to practice, you simply pause the video and you come back to it when you're ready to check your answers. All right, so let's do this. So one thing that I noticed is some people ignored what I said about eliminating excess verbiage. You really need to stick to the kinds that we went over in the examples. Review all of the examples of the kinds of things we eliminated. The 13 or so simple arguments, all of the complex arguments. Look at the notes. Look at all the list of things that you're supposed to eliminate. Some people eliminated too much. Some people took important parts of a premise out. Some people made their sentence worse. Some people even created sentence fragments out of perfectly good statements or sentences. So make sure you're not eliminating things that make your argument worse, or that take things, or that make something decent and good not so good, if not bad. All right, so let's go ahead and do this. So there's nothing for me to take out of the first statement. On the one hand, that's just a transitional introductory phrase. If you don't have that in your master document of things to eliminate, and you can find that somewhere in your notes, go ahead and say that you should take out introductory clauses and phrases, as well as statements that their only function is to introduce or transition you to a different or new topic or idea. So I want to say it was. So I would be okay with crossing out I want to say, but the reason why I'm keeping it is because I think it's relevant to the conclusion of saying it's not rational, because I want to say means I haven't made a definite, conclusion. So here, if you cross this out, then I'm going to think that you interpreted I want to say as a kind of hedge, lacking certainty. But in this kind of an argument where you're saying it's not rational for you to decide, that's part of the point, isn't it? That you are lacking certainty. So this might be functioning not merely as a hedge, but to make the point that you're lacking certainty about this being the conclusion that you want to draw. So I would accept either one here. And again, if you're torn and you're like, well, maybe I should do this, maybe I should do that, you can always leave a comment, and based on your comment, I will consider your comment in grading your markup. Okay, so because, of course, we know that we need to get rid of premise indicators, making people stay at home helped do, okay, so nothing to get rid of there. Okay, here we want to get rid of, after all, a premise indicator. And then it seems like, so this one isn't really saying, well, you know what, and this one, yeah, I think if you wanted to keep this hedge here in this kind of response for this conclusion, it's a not rational kind of conclusion, I would be okay with that. So I'm going to leave it in there, and I think it'll make sense why I want to leave it in there when I reformat it. But normally, if you don't have it's not rational for me to decide, if you took a definite stance and you say things like I want, it seems, then you should definitely take those kinds of things out. Okay, remember those are hedges. All right, so okay, and yet, just kind of a transitional phrase. It's like saying and, but, however, so we get rid of those. Remember, you use this to draw a line through stuff. I'm torn. I already told you why I'm going to keep that. I think, so we definitely want to get rid of I mean. We don't need that in there. I think they're not really expressing, they're expressing uncertainty in the way that it was lectured on before. It's not really about I'm lacking certainty in the way that I've been talking about it, so I am going to cross this out here. All right, the effects, okay, nothing to get rid of there. It seems wrong to make one, so here, again, this doesn't really fall in line with what I've been saying about other words that are typically function as hedges. Wait, it seems wrong. Okay, so notice I can't get rid of the word it. But one thing I'm going to have to be careful to do is to replace seems with some kind of other verb when I do my reformat. So what I could do is just go ahead and put it there. So I would interpret this as I got rid of this hedge, or this word that seems to be functioning merely as a hedge. And so I had to put this verb in there for the sentence to still make sense. Okay, so hence we're going to get rid of that conclusion indicator. I am also thinking that it was not morally permissible. Okay, so it was not morally permissible. Here I am going to leave in this word thinking, even though it often seems like a hedge. I got rid of it here, but it seems to make more sense to keep thinking here. It's not merely functioning as a hedge. It's saying I'm lacking conclusion about what? Whether I should accept this conclusion or take this conclusion as my definite stance, which is relevant to claiming it's not rational to take a definite stance. So I'm also thinking that it was not morally permissible. Okay, So, all right, now notice, remember guys, you've got to bracket and number every statement, even if you take out the statement, mark it up. Sounded kind of gangster saying to take it out. And by the way, I am from East Dallas, from the East Side locals and the Crips, so sometimes I talk like that. Sometimes I speak like that. Just letting you know. Okay, don't be fooled by my academic status, guys. I have a very diverse background, one that you might not expect. Okay, or be surprised by. Okay, so that said, also remember your bracketing numbering, that you put the number and then the label. Okay, all right, so now, what do we need to do next, everybody? We need to reformat and do what else? What else do we do while reformatting? We apply what? Uniform language. Don't go overboard with that. I think there was one or two people who didn't properly apply uniform language, so they ended up distorting and completely changing a statement that they made. And in fact, I think they ended up merely repeating something else that they said. So be careful with that. All right, so as you know, my technique is just to copy and paste at this point, and then I start reformatting. So I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to reformat, and then like that, you don't have to wait for me or watch me reformat. Why don't you try to reformat on your own, or to get a sense of things, where are things going to belong, and then the video will show the answer in about 2 seconds. Okay, so I thought I was going to give the final answer, but no, because there were some mistakes that people made on this front. I iterated earlier in the semester that there should be, if you crossed something out or you drew a line through something in the ordinary argument, I said it must not occur. And yet some people left stuff like this, words with a line through it. So make sure you don't do that. Now, let's go ahead and work through this some more. Okay, as you've seen, I've gone ahead and gotten rid of the stuff that we have a line through, but I did want you to see that because some people did make that mistake. Not very many, but a few. But it's good to remind yourself of that. All right, so now what do we need to do? What else needs to be done? We need to, I'm going to show you a mistake that people make. Okay, so a few people, what did I do right here? I got rid of the indicators. What are they? Well, I'm just gonna go back up here and see what I labeled it as. And I realized I forgot to label some statements. Look at that, 6 and 7. I did say earlier in the video that 6 and 7 seem to support 8, so I forgot to label them. So make sure you don't miss anything like that. Ooh, and actually, that's another mistake I saw, or problem that I saw with some answers. Some people did just that. They bracketed and numbered their statements, but they did not put the label in, and they didn't eliminate it, and they might have had it down here, but where do you get the most points for this kind of task? Up here. If you, let's say that this is an argument, so this one actually has 8 statements, so this would be worth, each statement would be worth about 10 points in the ordinary argument. Even if bracketed and numbered, there would still be 6 points off for each of these statements. So it'd be minus 12 right there, because while the statements were bracketed and numbered and they weren't eliminated as they shouldn't have been, they were not labeled. Okay, so now I went ahead and corrected that up there. So then I'm gonna put premise up down here as well. But this also points to, let's say I submit this, okay? What's wrong with it? What's going to get counted off? So this counts for about 20%, 20 to 30% of your grade for this task. I actually saw this. Some students had numbers in front of the labels, despite the very specific instructions early in the semester and all of the examples, right? Oh, another mistake that I saw is that even though I iterated and warned you guys not to do this, some people, maybe 1 or 2, numbered the premises and didn't even put a statement number for the conclusion. But I already lectured on that, so I'm not going to repeat with respect to that kind of stuff. But obviously you don't do that. Okay, so next, guys, I'm in my coaching mode. I'm very direct. So I hope you can appreciate that. I'm not trying to be mean or belittling or anything like that. I'm just very intense. You guys are my players. I'm your coach. I have got to I just get straight to the point and trying to, point out stuff. So please keep that in mind. I care about all of you. I just get into a real, coaching mode. I get seriously intense. Okay. All right. So this has to go, right? The numbers should not be in front of the statements. Okay, so now we have, with the exception of that right there, now we have the labels first, right? What is still problematic with this part right here? They have not renumbered things, right? They've still got the original statement numbers, and what else is wrong? What should not have numbers here? None of the conclusions. So this was all lectured on already, so I'm not going to explain that right here. So this should be, well, first of all, to decide the numbers, we want to kind of get a sense of what is what, right? So we have, I want to say it was, that's a subconclusion. And remember, what were the premises in support of that? That was 3 and 4. Making people stay at home helped to slow the spread of the virus. Keeping people safe from dangerous diseases is the right thing to do. Oh, so P3 and P4. Now, in the original argument, I don't know how I ended up with this right here. But in the original argument, you will remember that it was statement 2, 3, and 4. But remember what I said in the lesson on complex arguments. When you have a subconclusion, if there are premises that are directly supporting a subconclusion when you reformat, you want to put them above that subconclusion. 3 and 4 are used to directly support this subconclusion. They are not used to support statements 5, 6, 7, or 8. Therefore, they should not be directly above those statements, but directly above the statement that they are directly supporting. Now, we've got I'm torn. Now, remember, this is about 2 sides, so it doesn't really, we might not want to leave that there. Why don't we just go ahead and say what the other side is? Well, where is the other side? It's in 6, 7, and 8. Notice that statements 6 and 7 were given in direct support of statement 8. Hence, they're already in the order that they need to be in. We're going to go ahead and move those to right here. All right, so we still need to, okay, so now that we've got that done, right, now we need to work on the numbers. So statement 3, a premise becomes premise what? 1. Statement 4 becomes premise 2. And this should have what? No number. This becomes premise what? 3. This becomes premise 4. Should this have a number? No. And then this becomes, look, that is premise 5. Interesting, okay. So statement 5 turned out to still have the number 5, but that's a coincidence. And then what else do we need to do? We need to get rid of what in the last statement? The number 1. Okay. All right, so now we've got those issues taken care of. And by the way, since we've done this, in none of the examples or none of the mandatory notes did we say you should include S1 or the statement number before these. So that's just cluttering things up and takes away from the objective of reformatting. All right, so what's still wrong with this? Because I saw this as well. And I think what some people did is they watched a video or something up to this point, but didn't watch it all the way through, and or they did not confer with their master document and or all the examples. Do any of my examples or any of the notes say to leave the brackets in? No, so we should get rid of those. Okay, so we're improving, guys, but what is still a problem? And I saw this maybe in 1 or 2 responses. What is that ending with? A semicolon. What should it end with? A period. What about here? What's the problem here? We need capitalization. Already got a period. I want to say it was, comma. Nope, statement should end with a period. Oh, and I forgot this little bracket right there. So let's get rid of that one. Okay, making people, okay, so I'm going to start applying uniform language as we go through this cleanup of the writing mechanics. Making people stay at home or stay home help to slow down the spread of the virus. Okay, so if you don't mention the coronavirus specifically, go ahead and do so. So not just the virus, which virus? Either say COVID-19 or the coronavirus. I'm going to say the coronavirus. Okay. All right. It seems like keeping people safe from dangerous diseases is the right thing to do. I want to say it was. Uniform language. What was what? Making people do what? Stay at home. You got to remember, what was it that was under, what was the point of debate? Whether it was morally permissible to make people stay at home, right? So it was what? Morally permissible for the government to make me stay at home. Okay. Was problematic here. We need a capital letter. The effects on small businesses have been horrible. What's wrong here? Need a capital letter. It. Let's do small letters there. Is wrong to make one sector of society bear the economic burden of the public health. Already has a period. I'm also thinking that it was not morally permissible. All right, so what I realized is, yeah, so I told you why I want to leave this in here. I would be okay if you took that out, though, of course. I'm also thinking that what was not morally permissible? So again, uniform language. That it was not morally permissible for what? For the government to make me shelter in place. Okay, now I'm torn. Okay, so that's okay, but what do they really mean? Let's take out this kind of fluffy language and be exact. What do they mean by that I'm torn? I'm not able to choose. So there's different ways we could say this. I think I'm going to say I'm not able to decide. When they say I'm torn, they're saying they're torn maybe because they can see both sides. So I am able to see both sides are both, maybe because they see them as both compelling. Okay. I'm able to see that each side of the argument is compelling. I'm able to see good reasons on both sides of the argument, because that's why they're saying they're torn, right? They're torn between their appreciation for the logic in both arguments. Could also say something like that. So I'm able to see both sides are compelling. Okay, so then, and this is keeping me from choosing, not this is keeping me, it's making it what? Hard. So when we say I'm torn, okay, so, and this is making it hard to decide which side of the debate I am on about the government, about the, I'm going to use a lot of uniform language here, about the moral permissibility of government making me shelter in place. I think that the prompt for you guys, I might have been misremembering it. I think I asked you whether it was morally permissible for the government to make people or its citizens shelter in place. So make sure that you go with whatever the wording is in the prompt that I gave you. Okay, so that, do you see how this more clearly and exactly expresses the idea I'm torn? Now, some of you might be saying, hey, there's two statements here. There are exceptions to separating two statements, and that is when you're trying to say that two things are true at the same time. In other words, they're saying both A and B are true, okay, or they're intimately connected. And some of you did do that, where you didn't separate two statements that were separated by and. Sometimes it makes sense to do that. And so if you're ever in question about whether or not you should do that, you can always ask me. So italics. Okay, so we also have to get rid of italics, right? We shouldn't have any italics or bold or underline or anything like that. I'm able to see both sides are compelling, and this is making it hard to decide which side of the debate I am on about the moral permissibility. And actually, if you were like, let's say you're not sure, I'm like, oh, I don't know if this is one of those instances where I can have and. Technically, you could just say this. Seeing both sides. So here's a way to get rid of those two statements. Seeing both sides makes it hard to decide which side of the debate I am on. Oh, that's cool. Okay, so if you're applying uniform language and you're tempted to create a statement or to create a sentence that seems to have two statements in it, separated by and, you can try to find a way to apply uniform language where you don't do that. So it's not rational for me to take a definitive stance on whether it was morally permissible for government to make me shelter in place. Okay, so now notice we've got premise 1 and 2 are given in direct support of the subconclusion. Premises 3 and 4 are given in support of this subconclusion. So 1 and 2 work together to support this. 3 and 4 work together to support this. Then premise 5 is brought in to justify this final conclusion. Okay. So you can get extra credit as before, and the way you're going to get extra credit will be illustrated at this point. If you're not interested in extra credit, then you can stop watching the video and you will do fine, all things considered. But if you would like to have a refresher and reminder on extra credit, then keep following this video. So one thing you guys know is that I really like you to pay attention to formatting. So you would title this Ordinary Argument, and you would bold that. Oh, not the whole thing though. You will not get extra credit if you bold the whole thing because it's hard for me to read so much bold. Okay, then underneath that, for extra credit, I'm going to be very picky. Okay, then I want the pattern right underneath that. Some people ignored, forgot, or didn't refer to their notes and examples when it comes to having arguments with consecutive premises, and some people typed up more than one P in a row. And that is not consistent with the lessons. So this one should be what? The pattern is final conclusion dash. Then we've got a subconclusion followed by at least one premise followed by another subconclusion. All right, that is the pattern. And why it is, I'm not going to lecture on the reason. Go back to your notes and tips and warnings and examples. Okay, so then what you're going to do is you are going to give me the argument diagram, and you do have to label these to show me that you know what is what. So this is the argument pattern and the argument diagram are for extra credit. All right, so argument pattern. Argument pattern, what I do is I go between the reformatted version and the formatted version. I go between the formatted version and the ordinary version. Why? Because I need to know what the statement numbers are, but to make sure I do the diagram correctly, I need to look at the formatted one in case I had to position premises against the conclusions that they're directly supporting, and I see that better in here. Okay, so I know that the final conclusion is going to come last. So I'm just going to go ahead and put S1. The final conclusion was S1. Okay. I know that everything's supposed to be given in support of that. I might have to reformat this in a minute. So I'm just kind of getting my basic argument diagram down. All right. So I know that P1 and P2 are support of the subconclusion. So what were these originally up here? And actually I'm thinking you might want to do the diagram before you get rid of the statement numbers. That's what I would do. And I think that's what I told you to do last time is before you get rid of the statement numbers down here, first do your diagram. Why did I call that a pattern? All right. Okay, so now I know that statements 1 and 2 were statements 3 and 4 up here. So I'm going to put statement 3, a premise. This should not be bolded. Works together with statement 4, another premise. Make sure that arrows when you have joint premises, make sure the arrow, quote unquote, is directly below the plus sign. If there are just two, if there are three premises in support of a conclusion, you'd have the arrow directly under the second premise. Okay, so that's not, those two are not given in direct support of S1, but they are given as part of the support for S1 by arguing for which statement? Statement what? 2, right there, the subconclusion. So statement 2, a subconclusion. Man, if you followed the directions exactly for week 2 for this kind of item, I'm almost giving you the answer. Of course, there might be a little bit more variation. You may have 1 or 2 less premises than I do here in this example, but it's very similar if you followed the directions exactly and you picked that it wasn't rational for you to decide for this response. Okay, so then I know that I'm looking at this. So I've got statements 3 and 4 in direct support of this subconclusion. This is its own little argument right here. It has nothing, it does not work with this argument. It does nothing to support anything here. And this argument is its own here. These statements do nothing to support anything here. So we're going to move over to the side. And then we look back up at the statement numbers. Those were statements 7, 6 a premise, 7 a premise, and 8 a subconclusion. So I've got statement 6 a premise plus statement 8, 7, another premise. Oh, I've got to underline these. Oh, another thing, some people in their diagrams didn't get credit because they underlined everything, and you don't underline everything. I already explained what it means to underline and why you would underline something. All right, now I'm not done. I'm still trying to get to my final conclusion, but I got to make sure there's nothing else. And I do have statement 5, which turned out to be premise 5. So we're going to put that as being supported by the 2 subconclusions, because that's what they're arguing, right? Hey, man, I can see 2 opposing conclusions, and because I can see 2 opposing conclusions, I'm torn. Seeing 2 opposing conclusions with good logic makes it difficult for me to decide. Okay, so it's a little bit harder. Okay, no, we can do this. Okay, so then these 2 subconclusions, okay, join together at this step of the argument, right? And then the fact that the logic for 2 opposing subconclusions can be seen. Oh, got to get rid of that underline. Right, so it's the very fact that the person making this argument can see the logic for 2 opposing conclusions, and it's implied that the logic is good on both sides, that they say that they are torn, right? That it makes it hard. So we're going to put S5, a premise, and then that is where we finally get to S1. Because it is hard for them to decide, they're torn on the issue, they realize that that according to philosophy, it is not rational to take a definite position. Whoa, so beautiful, guys, so beautiful. All right, so that's some extra credit right there. And then finally, to get full extra credit, you would want to label this what? Reformatted argument. And this time, I want you to add this, with uniform language. To remind yourself that you should be applying uniform language, but don't go too crazy. Look at all the examples and notes to make sure that you're sticking to the kinds and instances of uniform language applications that I've given you. Okay, so now I don't want to make this video any longer, but really, if I'm intellectually perseverant and I'm striving for excellence, I would go through all of this, make sure I didn't miss anything. I would go through all of this, make sure I didn't miss anything. And then I would go through these 2 things and make sure that they're correct, especially if I ended up making corrections to the ordinary argument or the reformatted argument. All right, so you guys know that when you're ready to post your answer, you're ready for it to be counted, you have to click submit. And then look at how beautifully this appears with the formatting. That is lovely. It makes me happy.